Okay, so now we're in question number 3 of the ACT English test. Let's begin. We're going to start by reading the sentence as it is. An author, lecturer, filmmaker, and fierce advocate for elephants, which face a daunting array of threats to their survival. From droughts to human encroachment, Moss is widely considered an expert on the social behavior of these creatures. Again, it's a very long sentence, and if you can recognize that simplifying it is a possibility, I recommend doing so. I don't need to say all of these things. I could just say, a fierce advocate for elephants, which face a daunting array of threats to their survival from drought to human encroachment. Moss is widely considered an expert on the social behavior of these creatures. Perfect. Okay, so the way you assess this, right, if we're going to use that concision technique, you would not really have an advantage because each of these have one type of punctuation mark. Here it has a em dash, colons. This one has a comma. Now this one here would be the most concise, A. That's because there's no punctuation at all. And if I read it, I would recognize that that sounds a little awkward. A fierce advocate for elephants, which face a daunting array of threats to their survival from droughts to human encroachment. Moss is widely considered an expert. It's like I have two thoughts that are pushed together and they make no sense. So I know that A would be incorrect if I was going to use that concision technique that we used in the other two. But that still leaves us with three options. So we still need to understand our punctuation rules if we're going to be answering this correctly. So in order to understand this question, we're going to have to learn what each of these are and what their purposes should be. So the first one is this em dash. Let's start with that for B. Now an em dash, if there's one of them, right, if there's only one em dash, it's used in the same way colons are used. Just like that. They mean the same thing. If I have two em dashes, like this, then it's used in the same way that two commas would, to separate out non-essential information. And so those are the two use cases for the em dash. If there's one, it's the same thing as colon usage. If there's two, then it's the same thing as having two commas. So if you don't know that, I would write that down and memorize that. But if you're like most students, you're not really sure what colon usage is. So let's just go into that right now. Colons over here, they separate out on the left-hand side an independent clause. This has to be an independent clause, and I think a lot of students get tripped up over that. It has to be a complete thought. You could put a period at the end of an independent clause, and that's how you know. On this side, yes, a list, right? Rarely will the ACT actually present a list to the right of the colons. It could be a question, right? It could be an illustration, right? If I'm illustrating something. But the most important thing is all of this stuff, it modifies anything to the left. Okay, so whatever it is that's going to modify whatever I was talking about earlier, that would have to go to the right of the colons. To the left of the colons must be an independent phrase, independent clause, sorry. And this is whatever is going to be modified. Okay, so I want you to think of colons more generally, not just as something that separates items in a list. Okay, so now we have a good understanding of colon usage and em dash usage. Now comma usage, we talked about that. That's how we separate independent clauses from dependent clauses, right? That's one use case. So I'll say independent clause from a dependent clause. Now there are other use cases for that, but that's going to be the more pronounced. Another way is if I had two commas, like right up here, I'd be separating out non-essential information in the middle, or I could use two em dashes to separate out non-essential information. Okay, so now that we know the rules, I'm going to show you how we recognize which one of these to use. A fierce advocate for elephants. Look at this. Notice how I have this em dash right here. Now, when did I say we need one em dash? What is that like? Well, it's like colons, right? So instead of having an em dash there, I could have just put colons in its place. Now, the rule for colons is that I need an independent clause to the left of the colon. So let's see if we have an independent clause. A fierce advocate for elephants, that is not an independent clause, is it? No, it's like the beginning of a sentence. So can I use just one M dash here? No, I can't, but can I get rid of it? Nope, I can't do that either. So the only way to make this sentence correct is if I exchange this first use case of M dashes, which is going to be using it just like colon usage, for the second method, which is having two M dashes, which is like having two commas. So the only way to make this sentence correct is if I add another M dash somewhere else in the sentence. How about right there? You see that? So if I have an M dash here and an M dash here, now what I'm doing is I'm separating out non-essential information. All of this stuff from which to encroachment in that case could be spliced out as what's called a parenthetical reference. And a good way to know if that's correct or not is read the sentence without the information in the middle and hear how it sounds. A fierce advocate for elephants, Moss is widely considered an expert on the social behavior of these creatures. Now that's correct. So we would definitely want to separate out this information with another M dash. I can't use a comma here because if I'm going to start the parenthetical phrase with an M dash, I need to end with an M dash. If I started it with a comma, I would have to end with a comma. We could also have used parentheses. If I started with a parentheses, I would need to end with the parentheses. So we know that B has to be correct because it's the only piece of punctuation that would allow me to make the sentence correct, given that I already had an M dash up here. And because we knew the rules, where one M dash is like a colon, or like colons, two M dashes like commas, I know that I'm going to need the M dash in order to complete the sentence. So these answer choices must be wrong because this is the only one that makes it correct.